Today's scripture is read from Psalm chapter 14, verse 1. The fool says in his heart, "There is no God." They are corrupt, their deeds are vile, there is no one who does good.
Good morning.
Good morning.
If you are here this morning, I'm going to make an assumption. You believe in God. Or why would you be here? But for the next few weeks, I want to talk about this subject of why we believe. Paul, in our class in Hebrews, was talking about faith and people struggle with it. Last quarter, I was teaching on the idea of the fact that Paul announces that there are some matters of first importance. In other words, there's some matters that we need to hold dear and precious to our lives. And so this morning, I'm happy to profess, I believe in God. And I hope that you, if you are here, do also believe in God as well. One of the reasons we should have such great faith and understanding of what God has done for us is the fact of what Paul shares with us there in 2 Corinthians chapter 1. That we have a God and a Father who seeks out of his compassion to comfort us in all our troubles. And if that's not enough reason to believe and have faith in a God who reaches out to us, who wants us to have the best things in life. You know, according to the scriptures in Hebrews 11 and verse 6, that without faith it's impossible to please God. Because it says there, anyone who comes to him must believe or have faith that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. So why do I believe in God? I've never seen him. Have any of you ever seen God? We've never seen God, but yet you're here and hopefully you believe in him, you have faith in him. Yet there's more reason to believe in God than there is not to believe. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We know from 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 7, it teaches us we are to live by faith and not by sight. And too often in our lives, we want proof. We want someone to show us exactly what we're following and what we believe in and what we practice. There are so many things, though, in this world that we cannot see, but yet we believe in and we trust in them. I've shared this message with many of you before in classes I've taught, but one of the things about faith is you believe in something, even though you cannot see it, you're sure it's going to happen. You walk over to the wall and you flip a switch, and you've never seen electricity in your life, but you know that when you flip that switch, what's going to happen? The lights are going to come on in the room. You're going to be able to see, you're going to be able to avoid stubbing your toe on all those hidden objects that threaten you. And God is kind of like that. We have never seen him, but yet we believe in him. The same way that you've never seen the wind. But if you walk outside on a windy day, you've experienced the wind. You've been there when it tries to blow you over, or at least it moves your hair. That's why I cut my hair. I don't ever have to worry about it blowing my hair out of place anymore. When you don't have hair, you don't worry about it. The wind just goes right over. In our lives as Christians, we need to have a faith that God exists, that he's there, and that he will be there to help us. So what are some of the reasons that we have for believing in God, for trusting that he's going to be there when I need him the most in the troubles that this life brings to me? Well, one of the things that we see first and foremost is that there is an evidence of God in the design in the universe. When you look around yourselves, you can see, at least with the planets and the heavenly bodies, there's an orderly movement. You know, there wouldn't be space travel today if they couldn't predict where a planet's going to be or where other objects in the sky are going to be at a certain point. They are able to predict it and know it because there's patterns. These things naturally go on. As a young boy, I remember laying on the ground and watching the sky and seeing the things. And it was always amazing to me, the design that went into that. And so when you look at those kind of things and you understand that God set the earth on exactly a 23-degree slant. Have you ever thought about that? Why is it that we don't burn up as we turn to face the sun? Because God placed the earth exactly where it needs to be, so that when it turns towards the sun, we don't burn up. If he had even changed that percentage by 5%, guess what? The temperatures would be up to 900 degrees, everything would burn up, we'd burn up, and it would be over. Consider the animals, their instincts, their migration patterns, the hibernation patterns of groundhogs or bears. When you consider all those things, you've got to understand that there is an evidence of design in the universe. That these things didn't just come about on their own happening and being, but there was a designer who placed these things and made them happen. We read in Proverbs chapter 6 and verse 7. It tells us to go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest. What was it about the ant? I used to get on the ground and study the ants and watch them as they would pick up something sometimes twice their size and carry it back to the den to be able to eat it and to devour it. God created all these things to do amazing things beyond our imagination. And when you consider this, how can you not believe in intelligent design? How can you not believe that there is a creator who set all this into motion and into plan? And I haven't even started discussing the human body. Consider your own body. The eye, the nerve system, the brain, which weighs approximately 3 pounds and has 100 billion nerve cells in it, yet it can fit in a shoebox. All this that God designed in human beings. And that doesn't even begin to talk about the inner working of the heart and the lungs and the organs and how all these function together. And we haven't even mentioned DNA or other things and those intricacies that God designed. We need to know and believe that God is a designer. He created all this with a plan. And He created it with a purpose. And so design suggests there's a being, there's an intelligence behind all that we see around us. You know, if you have a watch and it's broken, you can be like my brother and tinker with it and take it apart. Or you take it to a watchmaker who helps design it and can repair it. We come to God with an understanding He knows us, He made us, and He can help us bring about healing in our lives. When you contemplate the universe and the human body, it rightfully produces an awe in us, and it points to Creator. We read in Psalm 19 and verse 1, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of His hands. A moment ago we read a passage that the fool says in his heart, there is no God. And you have to begin to know and understand that's exactly what it's talking about. It's foolish, with all the evidence around us, to believe that there is no God, but yet there are some in this world who want to persist in saying that God will allow me to do whatever, or there is no God. God put the earth here and He designed it. Psalm 139 and verse 14 tells us, I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Again, consider your own body. Consider your hands. Consider all the things that work together without any effort, without any thought, because God designed it to work that way. Paul reminds us in Romans chapter 1, verses 19 and 20, and he says, since what may be known about God has been made plain to them, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuses. Do you understand what he's saying there? You cannot look at yourself, you cannot look at the heavens, you cannot look at anything and declare there is no God, because God made it evident to all of us through his creation and what he made. But if that's not enough reason to believe in God, let's go on to some other reasons. One of the things that sometimes we struggle with is what's called the moral argument for the existence of God. And this argument is that there is an understanding or sense of ought or a sense of conscience. If God does not exist, then what about moral values and duties? Why do people sometimes believe that some actions are wrong if they've never been taught by a creator that there is right and there is wrong? But yet we read in passages like 1 John chapter 3 that if any man has material possessions and he sees a brother in need and he takes no pity on him, how can the love of God be in him? You see, the Creator put us here on this earth, and he created us with this sense of ought and sense of right and wrong and conscience. Now, people don't always do what they ought. They don't always act the way they should. Even atheists and agnostics, though, have a sense of justice. They cry out whenever there's a case of rape or murder. The moral value that exists in man is because we have a moral being that created us, who made us. If there is no God, then there is no right or wrong. And yet we see it time and time again. The atheist cannot object on moral grounds. If I want to kill him and take his possessions, if they don't believe in a God who is moral and right and created us. You want more proof? Look at the understanding that there are men in the world throughout all time who believe in a deity. There's a universal religious aspect to man. All the people across this world at one point or some point in their life have understood that there is something in this universe bigger and stronger than them. And they seek to worship that. Even the natives in countries that we marvel at have danced around fires at night while they look at the stars and understand that there is a being greater than them. Everywhere the human heart exists, there's a craving for this supreme being, for what we know as God. There are exceptions, but the exceptions do not invalidate the rule. For every deepest longing of man, there is something that satisfies it. If you get hungry, you know there's food that'll satisfy it. If you're thirsty, water will satisfy it. The same thing exists when you desire the being, the supremeness. Then the universal God meets that need. Paul says this longing for God was placed in man by God himself. We know from Acts 17, it says, from one man he made every nation of men, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he determined the time set for them and the exact places where they should live. God did this so that we might seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not very far from each one of us. You see, God created this universe, this world, with an understanding that man would seek him, because that universal desire is in all of us. Sometimes we resist it, other times we seek him. Psalm 42 and verse 1 says, as the deer pants for streams of water, so my soul pants for you, O God. My soul thirsts for God. When can I go and meet with him? And so this universal religious instinct that exists in mankind is another reason for us to believe in a supreme being as God who created the heavens and the earth. And then we reach the explanation that for every effect there must have a cause. It's called the cosmological argument. Whatever begins to exist has a cause, and the universe began to exist, so the universe has a cause. You know, there's many scientists working overtime, trying to prove that evolution is true. When I was in school, you had to read those texts, and if you went to church, you wondered, why do I have to read and study this information once I know that there is a God who created the heavens and the earth? But yet we needed to know and understand this, and the world sometimes goes down paths that it does not understand. There is a God, because we read in Genesis 1 and verse 1, what is the cause of this universe? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Look all they want. Scientists can try and prove that two particles collided together, a big explosion, and all that exists came about. Well, if you believe that you exist because two particles collided together, I'm sorry for you, because you don't believe in a God who designed a beautiful universe for us to live in. You know, sometimes these same people want to say, well, you say God created. Well, how did God come about? Who created God? Well, if you've ever studied your scriptures, you know that God has existed. He always was and always will be, because God is spirit. And his worshipers must worship in spirit and in truth. Or as Jeremiah tells us, am I a God nearby and not a God far away? Can anyone hide in secret places so that I cannot see him? Do I not fill heaven and earth, declares the Lord? You see, God defies the laws of nature. And people want to say that God does not exist because that cannot happen. So the argument does not apply to him, because God is the builder of everything. Every house is built by someone. In this world we live in was built by God. Then we have the argument for presence of beauty and majesty. The argument's based upon the fact that this universe exists and it's wonderful. How many of you have ever looked at the sky and looked at a sunset or a sunrise and not been in awe of the fact that there's a creator who made that? Amen. Where did the design come about? Was it by blind chance? Was it particles that collided together and made all this? You know that I like to go to the mountains. Go and view this universe, this world, from a mountaintop. See the wildflowers as they blaze in glory on a hillside. And tell me there is no God. We have an understanding of God, not only because we believe in design, not only because we believe in that moral argument we talked about, but again because of the artistic nature and the beauty that exists around us. In Psalm 96 we read, "For great is the Lord and most worthy of praise. He is to be feared above all gods, for all gods of the nations are idols. But the Lord made the heavens. Splendor and majesty are before him. Strength and glory are in his sanctuary." You know, all these things I've shared with you briefly this morning are just a teaser to what we're going to look at for the next few weeks. The understanding that I believe in God, we could go through so many of our arguments, and we'll look at that when we talk about why I believe in the Bible and in the Scriptures, because of the fulfilled prophecies and the scientific knowledge of the Scriptures, the uniformity of the Scriptures. Why do I believe that Jesus is the Son of God? All these things exist to give us faith and understanding that there is a God behind all of this. But the fact still remains, faith in God, belief in God, is a choice that all of us have to make. That's the crux of the matter. We make a point that there are two alternatives. You can believe in God, or you can choose not to believe in God. As Joshua was telling us there in Joshua 24, if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, as he says, then choose this day who you will serve. Whether the gods your forefathers served beyond the river and the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. In other words, stone, wood, things that have no ability to do anything but exist, because the creator of the universe made the wood, the stones, and all that we see. So Joshua says, but as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. We will believe in God. Choosing God and believing that He exists is an act that we have to make in our lives. And after careful thought, faith puts its trust in the fact that the evidence is strong. You know, we talk about faith, and sometimes we talk about it as, the evidence of things not seen. But you know what? There is no such thing as a blind faith when it comes to God. He created everything, and He made Himself known to us through His creation. And so faced with the ultimate fork in the road, and you have to make a choice, the fool decides, I won't believe in God. That means those who are wise have chosen the other path, to believe that God exists and that He rewards those who earnestly seek Him. The decision to believe is something we all have to face. Are you willing to make that decision to believe in God? Are you willing to follow Him? The time is coming one day, brothers and sisters, as Paul shares with us in Romans 14 and verse 11, that as surely as I live, says the Lord, every knee will bow before me, and every tongue will confess to God. There is coming a time it's going to be an overwhelming fact and an impossibility to deny that there is a God. Only a fool would suppress the evidence. As we read already in Romans 1, that God made everything to leave man without excuse. But the fool says in his heart, there is no God. This morning, will you make that ultimate decision to believe in God and to draw near to Him? Because as James 4 and verse 8 tells us, if you draw near to Him, He will come near to you. Will you answer His loving call to come and receive eternal life through His Son? Perhaps there's some here today who have started believing but got kind of sidetracked on the road, wandered away from God because they've had doubts about His existence or doubts about that He even cares for them. And so I urge you this morning, if you're struggling with your faith and your belief, come, let us help reestablish that. Let us help you get back on the right road. This morning, if you're willing to make that decision in your life, to put on Christ in baptism or to simply recommit your life to Him this morning, we encourage you to come while together we stand and sing.